Let's get right into it. If you've ever looked at a massive corporate scandal and thought, how on earth did nobody catch that? Well, you are definitely in the right place. In this explainer, we're taking those dense, honestly pretty intimidating legal rules around internal financial controls and we're translating them. We're going to map out exactly how these regulations act as a shield to protect corporate assets, keep management accountable, and save organizations from total disaster.
So here's the ultimate question about corporate security. What actually stops the sheer chaos of organized financial fraud? I mean, is it just having good people working for you, or is it something a bit more systematic? Look, with the immense complexity of modern business, trust alone just isn't a strategy anymore. To truly secure an organization, you need a hard-coded system, a legally mandated framework that operates in the background as this invisible operational shield.
Here's our quick roadmap for today. We're covering 1. The fraud prevention shield. 2. What are internal controls? 3. Why internal controls matter. 4. The board's responsibility. 5. The auditor's responsibility. And 6. The compliance timeline. Let's hit it.
The fraud prevention shield.
The absolute most crucial thing to grasp here is that this is not just bureaucratic red tape. It's a company's internal immune system. The whole concept of internal financial control came into existence specifically to promote risk management and solid governance processes inside an organization. By structuring these internal checks and balances, the main goal is to effectively stop instances of organized fraud dead in their tracks. It's the ultimate defensive line standing between corporate assets and total malfeasance.
Section 2. What are internal controls?
Right, so Section 134, subsection 5, Clause E formally defines internal financial controls as the policies and procedures adopted by a company for ensuring the orderly and efficient conduct of its business. Sounds very formal, right? But we really need to translate this dense legal text into everyday reality. What does orderly and efficient conduct actually mean when you're on the factory floor or sitting in the accounting department?
When you actually break down this section, it's basically a multi-layered safety net. It's about adhering to company policies, keeping the assets safe, and preventing and detecting frauds and errors. But arguably just as critical, it's about the accuracy and completeness of the accounting records and getting that reliable financial information prepared on time. Think about it. If your data is bad, your business decisions are going to be bad. These controls guarantee that when leadership looks at the financials, they're looking at reality, not fiction.
Moving on to Section 3. Why internal controls matter.
This brilliant quote from our source material hits the nail on the head regarding the why. A strong system does two massive things. It takes a huge amount of the heavy lifting off the auditor's shoulders, because they aren't starting from scratch in total chaos, and it provides reasonable assurance about the appropriateness of the accounts and the results they generate. In the corporate world, reasonable assurance is absolute gold. It literally means you can trust the numbers.
Section 4. The board's responsibility.
Now we're getting into who is accountable. Rule 8 of the 2014 Accounts Rules clearly mandates that the board of directors has to step up. Their report must state details regarding the adequacy of internal financial controls, specifically with reference to the financial statements. They can't just cross their fingers and assume things are fine. They have to put it in their official report. The absolute highest level of management is on the hook here.
Section 5. The auditor's responsibility.
But it's not just the board. Under Section 143 of the Companies Act 2013, the auditor has a very strict twofold job. First, they have to state whether the company actually has an adequate internal financial control system in place. But more importantly, and this is huge, they have to report on the operating effectiveness of such controls. Because let's be real, having a great policy sitting in a binder on a dusty shelf is one thing, but that policy actually working in the real world to prevent a material misstatement, that is the whole ballgame. It's all about ensuring the numbers presented to the public are rock solid.
This creates a really fascinating dual-layered accountability system. On one side, under Rule 8, the board has a duty to report on the adequacy of the controls. They're essentially saying, hey, we built a good system. But on the other side, under Section 143, the auditor must verify that adequacy and the actual operating effectiveness. So the auditor steps in and says, yes, they built it, but we actually stress-tested it and it works.
Section 6, the compliance timeline. So when did all this kick into gear? Rule 10A laid out a clear, phased rollout. It gave companies a voluntary grace period for the financial year starting April 1, 2014 and ending March 31, 2015.
This was like a practice run, letting organizations test their systems and auditors refine their checks. But for financial years commencing on or after April 1, 2015, the training wheels came off. From that day forward, the auditor's statement on both the existence and the operating effectiveness of these internal financial controls became 100% mandatory.
So, to wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about how these regulations apply to the organizations you work for, or even the ones you invest in. Ask yourself, is your company's financial control just a mandatory legal checklist to keep the board happy, or is it a living, breathing shield operating effectively enough to survive an auditor's rigorous testing? Thanks for joining me today, and keep questioning the systems that protect our financial world. You know, I like to think of a company's financial statements as this massive, highly secured vault. Inside are a company's most sensitive realities and secrets. But if the financial statements are the vault itself, what guarantees that the contents haven't been tampered with? Well, today we are looking directly at the security system protecting that vault. We're going to decode the specific guidelines issued by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, or ICAI, regarding internal financial controls over financial reporting.
Okay, let's dive into this. To make sense of this rather dense framework, we are going to break it down into 5 straightforward steps. First, the auditor's objective. Second, defining IFSC-FR. Third, the 3 key policies. Fourth, the audit process. And finally, number 5, rules of applicability.
Right, starting off with Section 1, the auditor's objective.
Before we get into the heavy mechanics of the rules, we really need to understand exactly what the auditor is actually trying to achieve here. According to the ICAI guidance note, the auditor's objective is, and I quote, to express an opinion on the effectiveness of the company's internal financial controls over financial reporting. So going back to our vault analogy for a second, this means the auditor isn't just inside counting the money. They are out there actively testing the security cameras, rattling the locks, checking the alarm wires. They have to confidently tell the public whether the security system itself actually works.
Globally, and specifically under Section 143(3)(I) of the Act, these 2 functions, the audit of the financial statements and the audit of the internal controls, are actually carried out together. They go hand in hand. But it's really vital to note here that the auditor is only looking at internal controls strictly related to financial reporting. So they aren't auditing how efficiently the HR department runs or, how fast the factory assembly line moves, unless, of course, it directly impacts the financial reports. Moving right along to Section 2, defining IFSC-FR. Now we have to define this massive acronym at the heart of the guidelines. The formal definition of internal financial controls over financial reporting is a process designed to provide reasonable assurance regarding the reliability of financial reporting and the preparation of financial statements for external purposes in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. In plain English, basically, it's a foolproof internal process designed by a company to absolutely guarantee that the numbers they report to the outside world are reliable and follow the accepted accounting rules. It's the mechanism that stops errors or fraud from warping the public financial statements.
Okay, Section 3, the 3 key policies.
So, transitioning from that high-level macro definition, what does this actually look like on the ground? We can chunk this regulation into 3 actionable pillars. First up is the maintenance of records. Second is the authorization of transactions. And third is the prevention of unauthorized use of assets. Simply put, a company cannot claim to have effective internal financial controls unless their policies explicitly cover all 3 of these areas. Let's break them down.
Let's look at the first policy, which really builds the foundation. Policy 1 mandates that a company must maintain records that, in reasonable detail, accurately and fairly reflect the transactions and dispositions of the company's assets. Meticulous, accurate record-keeping is literally the very first line of defense in our corporate security system. Because think about it, if the baseline data is messy or inaccurate, the entire financial report is compromised right out of the gate.
Now, think about your own workplace for a second. Who actually authorizes the receipts and expenditures? Policy 2 is entirely about this question. It requires reasonable assurance that transactions are recorded as necessary to permit the preparation of financial statements according to generally accepted accounting principles. But more importantly, it demands that every single receipt and expenditure is made only in accordance with explicit authorizations from the company's management and directors. You can't just have money moving in and out on a whim, right? There absolutely must be a traceable chain of command.
And that brings us to Policy 3. This one requires reasonable assurance regarding the prevention or at least the timely detection of unauthorized acquisition, use, or disposition of the company's assets that could have a material effect on the financial statements. So the crucial point is this. The controls have to act as an active alarm system. They need to stop unauthorized asset movements dead in their tracks, or detect them quickly enough before they can materially distort the financial picture that gets presented to the public.
All right, moving into Section 4, the audit process.
How does an auditor actually check all of this? Well, the ICAI outlines 4 exact steps. Step 1 is proper planning. An auditor can't just walk in blindly. They have to strategize. Step 2 is testing the design effectiveness. This means looking at the policies on paper. Are they actually designed well enough to catch an error? Step 3 is testing the operating effectiveness. And this is really where the rubber meets the road. The auditor tests if those well-designed rules are actually being followed by real people in real life. Finally, Step 4 is generating the report on the IFCFR. Now, the distinction between Steps 2 and 3 is absolutely crucial here. Having a brilliant security system on paper means nothing if the actual alarms are turned off in reality.
And finally, Section 5, Rules of Applicability.
So exactly which financial statements are actually subjected to these heavy reporting rules? Well, reporting on the adequacy and operating effectiveness of IFCFR definitely applies to consolidated financial statements, specifically for the components included within them, as long as it's a company under the 2013 Act. However, and this is a big however, reporting on IFC will generally not be applicable to interim financial statements. That means those quarterly or half-yearly statements get a pass on this specific internal control reporting, unless, of course, some other specific law or regulation steps in to demand it. We've completely unlocked the vault on the ICA guidelines today, navigating all the way from the auditor's core objectives right through to the strict boundaries of compliance. But as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to think about the organizations you work for or invest in. Is the financial security system truly providing reasonable assurance through rigorous design and daily operation? Or, when the auditor finally comes around to test the locks, will it turn out to be just an illusion on paper?
Reporting Authority, or the NFRA for short. If you've ever wondered exactly how a nation protects its investors from massive corporate fraud, or how it ensures that a company's financial statements are actually worth the paper they're printed on, well, you need to know about the NFRA. They are, quite literally, the ultimate watchdog of India's corporate financial health.
Here is our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll look at the quest for governance. Second, enter the NFRA. Third, the anatomy of the authority. Fourth, core functions. And finally, number 5, public interest.
Starting off with Section 1, the quest for better governance.
So to truly build solid corporate governance, the absolute bedrock is the quality of the accounting and the auditing. You can't have one without the other. Now, how did the government handle this in the past? Well, under Section 210A of the Old Companies Act of 1956, the central government set up NACAS. That stands for the National Advisory Committee on Accounting Standards. Notice that key word there, advisory. It was essentially just a think tank offering advice. But fast forward to the New Companies Act of 2013, and NACAS was completely replaced by the NFRA. And this is a totally different beast. The NFRA is a quasi-judicial organization that oversees both accounting and auditing issues.
You know, what makes the NFRA so incredibly powerful is that specific term, quasi-judicial. It's kind of a dense legal term, but basically it means it doesn't just sit around writing reports or politely offering suggestions. It is an entity with powers that actually resemble a court of law. It has the real legal teeth to actively oversee and enforce these accounting and auditing standards. It's a watchdog that can actually bite when it needs to.
Moving right along to Section 2, enter the NFRA.
The crucial date you're going to want to remember here is October 1st, 2018. That is the exact day the Government of India officially constituted the NFRA. They did this under subsection 1 of Section 132 of the Companies Act 2013, and when this agency arrived on the scene, it marked a massive, game-changing shift in how corporate regulation works.
Which brings us to Section 3, Anatomy of the Authority.
Let's crack open the hood and see how this thing is actually built. The leadership structure is surprisingly lean, but it is highly, highly specialized. At the very top, at the helm, you have one chairperson. But the government can't just appoint anyone off the street. The law specifically mandates that this has to be an eminent individual with deep, proven competence in accounting, auditing, finance, or law. And supporting them, there is a strict cap, a maximum of 15 members. That's it. It keeps the leadership incredibly focused and entirely expert-driven.
To actually execute its massive undertaking, the NFRA is systematically divided into 3 highly targeted committees. First, you've got the Accounting Standards Committee. Second, the Auditing Standards Committee. And third, the Enforcement Committee.
It's honestly a brilliantly logical division of labor. You have one group handling the rules for the companies, one group handling the rules for the auditors, and a final group to strictly enforce the whole shebang.
Next up, Section 4, Core Functions and Duties.
Okay, so what do they actually do on a day-to-day basis? Under Section 132, subsection 2, these core duties translate into a really clear four-step operational pipeline. First, they recommend accounting and auditing policies for companies to adopt, which then wait for central government approval. Second, they actively monitor and enforce compliance with those standards. Third, they oversee the quality of service of the professionals associated with these standards, meaning they are literally watching the accountants and the auditors themselves. And fourth, they perform any other incidental duties that are necessary to make those first three things happen.
And finally, Section 5, Protecting the Public Interest.
So, why does all of this regulatory jargon actually matter to you and me? Well, it all comes down to Sub-Rule 1 of Rule 4 of the NFRA Rules 2018. It explicitly states that the authority shall protect the public interest and the interest of investors, creditors, and others. How do they do that? By establishing high-quality standards and exercising effective oversight of both the companies doing the accounting and the auditors checking that accounting. Basically, the NFRA exists to safeguard the entire financial ecosystem that you invest your hard-earned money in.
It sets up this incredibly fascinating ecosystem of trust, doesn't it? The companies do the business, the auditors watch the companies, and the NFRA watches the auditors. They are the ultimate guardian at the top of the pyramid. But it leaves us with a final thought to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. In a complex financial system that relies on constant, unrelenting vigilance at every single level, what happens when even one link in that chain of oversight breaks?
Today, we're opening up what I like to call the Watchdog's Playbook. We're going to demystify a profoundly important institution in the world of corporate finance, the NFRA. So, if you're looking to understand exactly how modern corporate financial integrity is actually maintained and protected, you are in the perfect place.
Now think about this for a second. Who monitors the auditors? I mean, it's the foundation of everything we're looking at today. We rely so heavily on auditors to catch corporate fraud, verify financial statements, and just ensure companies are telling the truth to their investors. But what happens if an auditor looks the other way, or, makes a critical mistake? Who catches them? Well, this exact problem is why strict, systemic oversight is absolutely necessary, and it's exactly why the National Financial Reporting Authority was created.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, the auditing watchdog. Then, recommending new standards. Third, monitoring and enforcement. Fourth, publishing the findings. Fifth, the power to investigate. And finally, the fraud threshold.
Starting with Section 1, the auditing watchdog, which covers the NFRA's core mandate.
So, the National Financial Reporting Authority, or the NFRA, operates as a highly specialized task force. Its core mandate is straightforward but huge: to oversee accounting and auditing issues and protect the public interest. You can really think of them as the ultimate guardians of financial reporting quality.
Moving to Section 2, Recommending New Standards, where the NFRA acts as the rulemaker. The life cycle of an audit standard actually follows a very clear, collaborative three-step journey. Step 1, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, the ICAI, drafts and recommends proposals for new or amended standards. Step 2, the NFRA steps in. They receive these recommendations, review them, and get this, they can even demand additional information from the ICAI if they need to. They consider all of this however they see fit. And then Step 3, the NFRA makes its final recommendations to the central government for official approval. It's a hierarchy designed to make sure no single body is just creating rules in a vacuum.
Next up is Section 3, Monitoring and Enforcement. This is the NFRA's role as the inspector. To actually enforce these rules for companies governed under Rule 3, the NFRA is granted incredible access. They can actively patrol the profession by reviewing an auditor's working papers, audit plans, and communications. They can evaluate the sufficiency of the auditor's own quality control system and even perform their own testing of those procedures. And they don't just send emails. They can legally require the personal presence of the auditor to demand additional explanations. Pretty intense, right?
The crucial point here is that the authority isn't just looking at the final audit report. They can require auditors to submit reports detailing their own internal governance practices. Basically, they want to see exactly how an auditing firm is proactively working to protect its reputation, promote quality, and actively reduce the risk of failure. The NFRA literally forces the watchers to watch themselves.
This brings us to Section 4, Publishing the Findings, which is a real balancing act.
The law dictates a very careful balancing act here. If the NFRA finds non-compliances, they are mandated to publish these findings on their website for the public to see. However, they are explicitly instructed not to publish proprietary or confidential information. Instead, they can send that sensitive info in a separate, private report directly to the central government.
But there is a massive exception to this rule of confidentiality. Look at this quote from the regulations. The NFRA will not publish confidential info unless it has reasons to do so in the public interest, and it records the reasons in writing. So, if the public interest demands it, the NFRA can absolutely override corporate secrecy and publish everything, as long as they formally justify that decision in writing. It's a huge safety valve.
Now for Section 5, the power to investigate. The NFRA acting as the detective. In addition to oversight, the NFRA has the formidable power to investigate professional misconduct under subsection 4 of Section 132 of the Act. They can trigger these based on red flags from the routine oversight activities. But even more significantly, they can undertake suo motu investigations. That's a Latin legal term meaning on its own motion. Basically, they don't need to wait for a formal complaint. They can initiate an investigation entirely on their own, provided they record the reasons in writing.
To prevent jurisdictional chaos between the new NFRA and the older ICAI, the law draws a hard line. For specific, significant companies categorized under Rule 3, the NFRA takes exclusive disciplinary control. If the NFRA initiates an investigation into an auditor of a Rule 3 company, no other body can initiate or continue proceedings. Meanwhile, the ICAI retains power over misconduct cases for auditors of all the companies not covered by Rule 3. It's a very clear division of labor.
Finally, Section 6, the fraud threshold. This is where they ring the alarm. 1 crore rupees. That is a massive number, and it represents a critical, legally mandated threshold in the Watchdog's playbook. Here's exactly what that threshold means. If the NFRA, during its investigations, uncovers evidence that a company hasn't complied with the Act, and this non-compliance involves a fraud amounting to exactly 1 crore rupees or more, well, it's no longer just an internal regulatory matter. The law states the NFRA absolutely must report its findings directly to the central government. The situation immediately escalates out of their hands to the highest levels. We've covered a ton of ground today, from rulemaking and routine inspections all the way up to suo motu investigations and that 1 crore fraud trigger. As you process the information in this explainer, I want to leave you with this thought. How will the existence of such a powerful, multi-layered watchdog fundamentally reshape the entire landscape of corporate accountability? I mean, when auditors know that the NFRA can just walk in, demand their personal presence, test their internal systems, and publish their failures to the world, how does that change the way business is done? Think about it. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and I'll see you in the next explainer.